You know that the wicked prince hated the good king who ruled over the celestial city, and it made him very angry to see the pilgrims on their way from his country to that of the king. He had built this city, which was called Vanity Fair, just beyond the dark valley and the wilderness, because he knew that when the pilgrims reached its gates, they would be feeling tired and faint, and he hoped that it would then be easy to persuade them to stay there instead of going further on the way of the king. So he filled the great city with everything that was pleasant and beautiful. It had broad streets and lovely houses, and the stalls in its market were covered with glittering goods. All day long, the people were passing busily up and down. They wore lovely clothes and spent their whole time pleasing themselves. And the wicked prince took care to give them plenty of things to enjoy, so that they might never have a moment to spare in which to think of the king whom they had forsaken. After they'd lived in Vanity Fair for a short time, most of the pilgrims used to forget the king altogether, and when they saw other pilgrims passing on their way to the celestial city, they were ready to help the servants of the wicked prince in persuading the travellers to give up their journey. Now, it was dark when our two little pilgrims entered the town, so they stayed quietly in a sheltered corner near to the gate until the next morning. As soon as the sun rose, they began their walk through the city, for they thought that if they started early, they might perhaps reach the opposite gate before the streets became crowded with people. But little Christian's bright armour and the white suit which Faithful wore were not like the clothes of the children of Vanity Fair. And the boys had only gone a very short distance before they were noticed by some lads who were strolling idly about. "Ha! They are two little pilgrims," they cried. "Let's go after them and stop them." So they taunted and teased Christian and Faithful. Then one of the wicked prince's servants passed by, and when he saw Christian's shining helmet, he knew that the boys must be pilgrims. So he pushed his way through the crowd and seized them both by their shoulders. "What are you doing?" he asked. "Our prince does not allow children to quarrel in his streets." "But we're not quarrelling," said Christian. "We were just walking along quietly." "That's nonsense," replied the man. "You have caused all this crowd and disturbance. You must come with me." Oh dear, this is terrible. The governor of the city was one of the wicked prince's chief servants, and he hated the king and his pilgrims almost as much as his master did. When Faithful and little Christian were brought before him, he was quite glad to think that he had an excuse for hurting someone whom the king loved, and he said, "You are two very bad boys, and you must both be beaten. And afterwards you shall be shut up in the iron cage, so that the children of the town may see you and know what will be done to them if they follow your example." Faithful's cheeks grew very white, but he whispered to Christian, "Evangelist said that they might hurt us, but if we die, we shall go straight to the celestial city. I shall think of the king because he is sure to help me, and I will not cry." Then Christian determined to be brave too, and he remembered the picture he'd seen in the house of the interpreter of the Good Shepherd, whose feet were torn and bleeding. "He is our prince," thought Christian, "and he did not mind the pain. I must not either, because I am the king's servant, and it is written in my book that the king's servants are to be like the prince." So, as the governor said, both Christian and Faithful were beaten until they couldn't stand, and they were put in the iron cage for all to see. A crowd gathered, and people laughed and they jeered, and this caused even more disturbance. When the morning came, Christian and Faithful were taken to the governor's court, where the judge sat every day to try any prisoners who might be brought to him. He was an old man with a hard and cruel face, and like the governor, he hated the king and all his pilgrims. And in addition, there were 12 men sitting in the court called the jury. Faithful asked if he might speak, and the judge answered, "You ought to be put to death at once for all that you've done, but we will first hear what you have to say." Christian wondered how it was that Faithful had become so brave. His face was pale, but he did not seem to be frightened, although the judge and the people in the court looked wicked and cruel. Christian afterwards knew that the king had helped his little pilgrim and had made the timid boy brave and strong, so that he was not afraid to speak out and own that he loved his king dearly and would obey no one else. When Faithful had spoken, the judge turned to the jury and said, "You have heard this man speak out, and Faithful does not deny following the good king. He will not serve our prince, and by the laws of our city, he ought to be put to death. Christian can go back to prison." Poor little Christian's mind had been so troubled by all that had happened that he scarcely understood what the jury were saying. And when the soldiers of the wicked prince came in and led Faithful out of the court, he wondered where they were going. In a few minutes too, he was taken into the marketplace, and there he saw his companion in the midst of those cruel men, beating him and wounding him with their sharp weapons. "Faithful, Faithful," he cried out, but Faithful did not answer. He was looking up into the sky, and his face was shining with a beautiful light. Then Christian looked up also, and in the air, just above the place where Faithful was standing, he could see a band of angels with their wings outspread. And he knew that they were waiting to carry the soul of the little pilgrim to its home in the celestial city. Little Christian knew that the angels would carry Faithful safely into the presence of the king. And as he thought of this, he forgot for a moment he was of Vanity Fair, surrounded by the servants of the wicked prince. Suddenly, the boys of the city gave a great shout of pleasure because they loved to see a little pilgrim punished, and their cries startled Christian so that he turned once more to look at his lost friend. But the king is very merciful, and he did not wish Christian to know how much poor Faithful was suffering. A mist seemed to pass before his eyes, and he cried out again, "Oh, Faithful, Faithful." After a few days, the keeper of the prison came to him and told him that the governor of the city had given an order for him to be set free. So Christian started once more on his journey. He was just going through the great archway of the city gate when he heard someone running behind him, and then he felt a hand upon his shoulder. For a minute he was frightened, thinking that his troubles were beginning again. But the boy who had stopped him looked frightened too, and said in a half whisper, "Let me come with you. I don't want to stay here any longer." "Do you mean that you will be a pilgrim?" said Christian. "Yes, I'm called Hopeful, and I want to go with you."